Well, good morning again. I believe it's still morning everywhere we're broadcasting. My name is Kevin Darty, and I'm the director of the Illinois Agriculture in the Classroom program. I happen to serve as the president-elect of the national organization, and I'm on the committee for the virtual national conference. Thank you so much for joining us. We have about 600 teachers registered, 600 participants registered for our session today. We are so excited that you are here to join us. And throughout this session, remember, things are being recorded. If you can't join us through the whole thing, give us a couple of days to get all these videos rendered and put up online. It'll take us a day or two, so look for that. Right now, we are so excited that our conference, you're a part of our conference. Remember, our conference is sponsored by BASF, the CHS Foundation, and Corteva AgriScience. We're continually grateful for their support, and we're thankful that you're joining with us. But today, we have a very special guest that will be joining us, and we are so excited to hear from author Lisl Detlefsen. Lisl is the author of a growing number of picture books and books that focus on a number of agricultural products, including Time for Cranberries, Farm Boots, and Right This Very Minute. Now, she has several others that we're going to talk about, but Lisl lives on a farm in Wisconsin, literally on a family cranberry march with her husband and her two sons. So we are so excited to welcome Lisl Detlefsen. Thank you, Lisl, for joining us. And to begin with, why don't you tell us a little bit about your farm background, or more specifically, your lack of farm background, and how you ended up in a marsh in the middle of Wisconsin.
Yeah, I grew up a city kid in Janesville, Wisconsin, and I drank cranberry juice every morning, but I didn't know how cranberries were grown or how they made it from the farm to the table. And then I met my husband, who is a fifth generation cranberry grower, when we were both in school, and I had planned to move to a city, but love took me a different direction to the cranberry farm. And his family has been growing since 1870s. We live in the original farmhouse. That's what it looked like when it was being built. It was a balloon build. And if you can see, that is my husband's great-great-grandfather and great-great-grandmother. And then we remodeled it extensively in 2018. And these are the steps that look like books leading up to my office. So I'm very fortunate to have a really nice office space in our farmhouse, which previous to me inhabiting was home to a lot of bats and mice and storage, and now it's been remodeled into a really great writing space right on our farm. So while I'm writing, I see sandhill cranes walk past, I see our machine go past, our machinery. It's really a neat place to be, but very different than where I thought I would end up as a kid.
Well, and as you thought of growing up as a kid, your background wasn't even in children's literature. Tell us a little bit about your collegiate background and what you started out as.
Sure. So I actually always wanted to write children's books from the time I was very small. My lovely mother, who's a library media specialist, saved these. These were my first books that I wrote in first grade. If any first grade teachers are watching, thank you for all your, well, thank you to all the teachers, but the first graders who are teaching those early literacy skills. These were my very first books, and I love sharing them on school visits. But I just really loved telling stories and wanted to write. But then when I was in school, my major is in art from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And while I was studying art, I discovered I really don't like making art digitally. And that's where everything was headed. I really liked the tactile, hands-on feel. And I was not interested in web design or graphic design. And I remember walking down University Avenue and talking to my husband, who was back on the farm already. And I said, I don't want to do this. And he said, well, what do you want to do? And it was the first time I admitted I really want to make children's books. And he was very supportive. He said, you're supporting my dream to take over the farm. I'll support your dream to write children's books. He also likes to add there, he did not know what he was getting into with that agreement, because it did take me 10 years to sell my first book. It is very hard to break into publishing, but I feel really lucky that I get to do the job I've always wanted to do.
And Lisa, we actually had a question come up, and this is one I was going to handle later. We'll jump to it right now. Did you connect with a publisher, then they give you topics, or the reverse? Can you talk a little bit about that? And the whole, I guess this next one was the whole writing process. So walk us through that quick 10 years of becoming an author.
Yeah, so actually, once I decided that was what I wanted to do, we knew a few authors kind of peripherally in our family. And one of them I'd taken a writing class from when I was a kid at our local library. And my mom happened to run into her at the grocery store. She asked how I was, and she was the first of many people who recommended that I join SCBWI, which is the Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, which is a great network of people who are creating books for kids or want to create books for kids. So I got into taking some workshops and things. And then my mother's college roommate's cousin, if you can follow that, was a children's book writer and editor. And she helped me get started in freelance writing. So for years, I did some freelance writing for various companies, retelling stories, writing for standardized tests, which was not my favorite work, but really good experience while I was submitting my work to publishers. And Time for Cranberries, my first book, was an idea I got in college. And I revised, I think the number I tell kids, because it's the number of drafts I have saved on my computer, is 34 times. So this book went from a nonfiction book illustrated with my photographs to a realistic fiction illustrated book over that 10-year span. And then I found an editor who really connected with it at a workshop, and then revising with her turned into her publishing it. But my ideas generally start with me, and then working with my literary agent to help find a publisher who wants to champion that story and put it into print. The one exception to that was my book, 1, 2, 3, Jump, which my editor for Time for Cranberry said, I'd love to see a book from you about swimming lessons. So that was actually her idea that then I kind of leapt with. I had kids in swimming lessons at the time, so it felt like a really natural fit for me. And it's about this little kiddo here who's a little afraid to get in the water, which is something I can identify with, because I was not wild about getting in the water when I was a kid either.
Well, actually, I'll jump into that one. It seems like you were a little afraid to get into the water, but Time for Cranberries, really, your lack of cranberry knowledge comes through with a passion for this after 10 years of living on the farm. But in Time for Cranberries, you actually walk us through the whole process. So yes. let's jump in and talk about your first book first. Let's talk about it. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Time for Cranberries. Once I saw my first harvest, so I was a freshman in college, my husband and I were dating at the time. He brought me to the farm to see harvest, and I felt like Dorothy stepping into Oz. It's like I'd never seen the world in color before. The berries are floating and bobbing on the water, and we have beautiful autumn foliage, and there's animals nearby and really interesting machinery. And I said, this is so cool. How come I did not know about this? I grew up 2.5 hours from this. How could I not have known this was here? And we grow more cranberries in the state of Wisconsin than anywhere else in the world. I should have known about that growing up in Wisconsin. So I really wrote this book as this concept of a virtual field trip. I wanted kids who did not have the opportunity to visit a cranberry farm during harvest to see what that looked like. And that's kind of where I was coming from with this book, that I grew up as a city kid, not understanding or appreciating agriculture. And then marrying a farmer, I really discovered how absolutely critical it is. I mean, we eat every day, hopefully, and we have to acknowledge where that food comes from and the people who work tirelessly to grow it and make sure we have it. So that's kind of where that passion stemmed from. The cool thing about Time for Cranberries is I really thought I was writing the book for a kid like me who had not seen the farm. But then kids of our neighbors and friends in other growing communities would say things like, now I get to explain to my cousin in California what we're doing every fall. It was really nice opportunity for kids who do grow up on a farm to show other people what it looks like to live in a rural community. So that's become really important to me too. As in publishing, you don't necessarily see as much of that. You see a lot of urban settings or city settings. You don't see as much of kids growing up on farms.
So putting kids in a place where they're from, that's another, that people can see themselves in this book.
Yeah.
With Time for Cranberries, though, then joining SCBWI, your local chapter there in Wisconsin, I'm sure you had adults who had no idea that there were cranberries down the road as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And even finding that still, I was just at a writing workshop out on the West Coast with some friends. And one of them that I met, I talked to on the phone last night, and I said something about cranberries, and she asked us a very good question. I was talking about the difference in growing in Wisconsin versus on the West Coast. And then I referenced some friends who grow cranberries in Canada. And she said, now, do they do wet harvest like in Wisconsin, or do they use the trains like in Oregon? I'm so proud of you that you know that now. So I'm like trying to train these little cranberry ambassadors to help share the knowledge of how this crop is grown, because it's such an interesting crop and it's native to the United States. So I mean, it was growing here before we were here, and it has a really interesting history.
And it's interesting. You again, the whole connection. You grew up growing and drinking cranberry juice, had no idea. Now you're producing cranberry juice. So let's talk a little bit about the farm. What happens to your husband's cranberries, and what else is on your farm?
So we exclusively grow cranberries. As I mentioned, he's a 5th generation cranberry grower. Cranberries were growing here natively on the land. His great-great-grandfather bought the land from the state in 1871. So we recently celebrated our 150th anniversary as a farm. And we're part of the Ocean Spray Cooperative. So it's a grower-owned cooperative where the growers own the company, which I think is very cool. And I grew up drinking Ocean Spray juice, and now my family is on some of the labels, which is pretty fun. This is a cran apple box from Single Serves, but that's my husband and our youngest son. And that was a lot of fun. Those pictures were taken about 5 years ago, and I remember it was frigidly cold. This was right at the tail end of our harvest, and my youngest Wesley there was kind of shivering a little bit, and I thought, oh, geez, okay, how can I loosen him up a little bit? And I said, hey, think about when you're taking over the farm from Dad and you get to tell him what to do. And he giggled, and they managed to catch that picture. But it was a fun experience to have people coming into our farm and hearing our story and taking photographs of us. And so if you go to the grocery store and turn a bottle around, you might find us there.
There you go. And I did set you up to talk a little bit about your kids. I know those are an important part of your family too. You swing and a miss there, Lisl. You went right to the cranberries, but tell us a little bit about your family and specifically your son's involvements on the farm. We see a little bit of it. I'm sure he loves that 5-year-old picture of him on the box.
They are both incredibly good sports, and they give me a lot of my ideas and have really been a part of the journey of my stories. I have 2 sons. My oldest is 15 and in high school. My youngest will be 13 on Saturday. So I'm kind of transitioning into bigger kids in our family, but they are incredibly supportive of what I do. They're always interested in what I'm writing about, and it's been a lot of fun. They've given me a lot of ideas over the years. Taekwondo came from the fact that both of them are 2nd degree black belts. I brought Kevin, you asked, so I did bring, this is the collection of belts of my oldest son. So they work up the stages in various colored belts. And we have 2 cats who are also very important members of our family. And there was a day when we came home from Taekwondo and our cats were sparring essentially. And one of the kids said, it's like kitty kwando. And I thought, well, that should be a book. So that's where Cat Kwando came from. So my kids are definitely responsible for a lot of the ideas. And they are working on the farm too. Today is their day off, but they do work on the farm with their dad, and they help with a variety of jobs, particularly with spin trimming around the bulkheads, pulling maple seeds out of the maples. Grow really well in a cranberry bed, and we don't want them growing in the cranberry bed. So that's kind of a time-honored tradition for cranberry kids, is to pull maples. But they are very much a part of both our farming life and my writing life too.
Yeah, so in Central Illinois, we walk beans, and you guys walk cranberry beds. So
yes,
it's everything's a little bit different. And I'm thinking of your college background, not knowing about cranberries, and your son's going off to college and trying to explain to the non folks they're going to meet. Number one, I grew up on a cranberry farm, and number two, my mother's a children's author.
Yeah.
So that's it's going to be hard to say. But let's talk about your newest book. Let's talk about your brand new book, Farm Boots.
Yeah.
And let's talk a little bit about it. This was one that you were featured at the National Ag in the Classroom Conference just about a month ago. But tell us a little bit about Farm Boots and the genesis of it.
So Farm Boots kind of grew out of time for cranberries, because when I do school visits, I would always bring my hip boots. So these are the boots we all wear when we're harvesting here, because we do a wet harvest, and these keep your feet warm and dry. And when I bring them to school visits, the kids would love to see them and ask to try them on and stand in line and wait to try them on and pull one boot up over their shoulders and giggle. And I thought, there's something really interesting about these boots. And then as I'd be walking through our house, I'd see just how many different kinds of boots we have for different types of chores and seasons. And that's just on our farm. And I thought, I bet there are a wide variety of boots on a wide variety of farms. That would be a really fun topic. It is my first rhyming book, which I've always enjoyed writing in rhyme, but rhyme is really tough to get just right. So I hadn't really shared my rhyming text with my agent before, but she really enjoyed the book. Can I read a little bit of it?
I think that'd be awesome.
Okay, I'm gonna read my favorite section, which is fall, which, of course. And I do want to make sure to say, so the illustrator of this book is my lovely friend, Renee Kurla. She's the only illustrator of any of my books that I have met, and she was the illustrator for our book Right This Very Minute. So when Farm Boots sold to Feeding Minds Press, and they said, who would you like to illustrate? It was just, well, I hope it's Renee. So thankfully she said yes, and her style is a little different in this book, but equally lovely. So boots for harvest in the fall. When crops are ripe, collect them all. Take a break in boots for play, climb the rope and jump in hay. Then it goes into winter. So the book follows the 4 seasons and different boots on different farms. I do want to step back to that harvest page just to point out, as a little Easter egg, Renee put this little guy here in a Whittlesey Cranberry 1871 sweatshirt, which is our farm and our farm's original year. So that was a really fun surprise when I got to see the art that Renee had included that.
And if you'll hold that back up,
yeah.
Did Renee come to the farm, or was she using photos specifically of cranberry harvest?
She used photos. I'd love to get her here. We have not made that happen yet, but she has seen harvest on the East Coast, which is very similar harvest technique to what we do in Wisconsin. So she has gotten to see that. Hopefully we can get her here at some point. But she worked from a lot of photos and videos of different kids on their farms for the whole book. And of course, I sent her lots of pictures of the boots we have around our house too. And then her gorgeous end papers feature all of these wonderful boots. And thanks to a friend of mine's 4-year-old twins, I can verify all of these boots appear elsewhere in the story. So they are in action throughout the book.
Well, and as folks are asking questions about an author, you did mention that you have worked with your illustrator Renee on 2 books, and you actually know her. And you mentioned briefly that is highly unusual with a children's author. Can you walk us through that process, not only just with your agent, but also with the editor, and what happens from a children's book publishing perspective?
Sure. So in a traditional publishing path versus a self-publishing, which is a different path. In the traditional publishing, generally I write a story, I kind of work on it myself, then I wind up sharing it with another writer friend or critique group, get their feedback, revise a few times more, then I'll share it with my agent, see what she thinks. Usually we do a couple revisions, the 2 of us. And then if she feels like it's ready to send out to a publisher, she puts together a list of the editors she thinks would be a good fit for that particular story. And then we send it out and then we wait. So there's a lot of waiting in publishing, which my mother finds amusing because I was not a patient child. So this is a very funny career path for me in that regard. But once the books are out with editors, we wait to see what will happen. If someone does put an offer in on the book, then there's generally a discussion about logistical things about when the book will come out and the amount of money that you get for that book, and then also what they see for illustration style. In traditional publishing, you generally don't have a say of who they hire. I've been really fortunate, though, that the editors I've worked with have asked for my feedback, given me samples of portfolios, and had me weigh in or suggest people. And the fun part about working with Renee, so for Right This Very Minute, that was a brand new publishing company, Feeding Minds Press. Right This Very Minute was their first book. And they asked me, who would you want to choose for the illustrator for that book? And they wanted to work within the same literary agency that represents me. So I looked at the a part of Andrea Brown Literary Agency's stable of authors. So I looked through all their portfolios of illustrators. And not only did I love Renee's beautiful art, in her bio, she talked about how she liked projects that required a little bit of research. And I thought this is a perfect fit because she's going to need to learn how different things look on different farms and make sure it's accurate. And I was just overjoyed that she, in fact, agreed to do the book. And then when the book was named Book of the Year for the, I believe it was the centennial, was it not, of the Farm Bureau? Yes. So that was really exciting because we got to meet in person and hang out for a few days, and we bonded very quickly, and we've stayed in touch ever since. So then when Farm Boots rolled around, it was a little bit more collaborative in that we would have a little bit of communication directly, which is highly unusual. As you pointed out, Kevin, usually you don't have any contact directly with the illustrator unless, of course, it's, on social media once the book is out. But the great part about technology these days is I can live on our farm and work with my editors who are typically on the coast. And then my illustrators can be from anywhere. I've had an illustrator who lives in London, an illustrator who lives in Australia, Renee who lives on the East Coast. And we can all work together collaboratively thanks to, the internet and Zoom and all those tools we've come to rely on.
Yeah, I want to put a plug in and some ideas for some teachers, that type of thing. Farm Boots was released earlier this spring in Illinois. We did a social media contest with Show Us Your Boots, and we had students, we had the FFA teams bring in copies of their boots and show us 30-second videos, trying to outdo each other with the different kinds of boots they were wearing. So not a lot of cranberry marshes in Illinois, but we did see some muddy boots. We've had some muddy boot contests. We've had all sorts of stuff. So people have really latched on to the idea of farm boots. Again, it's a staple. You know it from your own livelihood. And my wife and I and my daughter, we live at home. There's always there's always shoes at the back door. So, and we don't have extra boots, but so it's a huge staple of it. So I encourage you to look at that. With your background in art, we do have a question that came in. Would you ever want to illustrate your own stories? What about that?
Yes. So when I first started trying to break into publishing, I was trying to do both. And I really did struggle too with, do I want to major in English or major in art? And I chose art with this idea that I was going to work in graphic design before I figured out that was not for me. But I did take a lot of literature courses while in school. And then when I was out of school, I was trying to do both. And my children were not great sleepers. And as I mentioned, I like to do art traditionally. And I mostly did watercolor, and I'd get my paper all set and get the moisture level just right on the paper and have my paints mixed up. And then invariably someone would wake up and need me. So I really kind of set that aside for a time and focused on my writing. And now it's a thing where if you've been good at something and are no longer good at it, a sport or a skill or a hobby, it's a little tough to kind of jump that hurdle again. I'm tiptoeing back into making art again. So we'll see. The door is not shut, but I have such tremendous appreciation for the huge amount of talent of the illustrators I've worked with so far. So my bar is high. It's going to be tough to feel like I can make art the quality I want it to be. So we'll see. But it is a good question.
Some art that I'm familiar with Lisl and our homestead. I think you had the pictures. Can you show them the stairway again?
Yes, absolutely.
That is one of my favorite Lisl stories. It's on her blog, that kind of thing. But stairway going up, and if you'll notice on there, tell us a little bit about what's on the the stair fronts.
So I don't remember where I first saw stairs that looked like books, but when we were talking about remodeling the farmhouse, the stairs that did go up to this attic space that I'm in were incredibly rickety and skinny. And my husband, every time I went up them, said, okay, be careful, be careful, be careful, because I'm quite clumsy. And I said, okay, we're going to have to redo the stairs because you can't follow me up them every day telling me to be careful. So when we redesigned them, I had this idea to make them look like books. So these are most of my favorite books from childhood. We had to come up with some rules, only one author could be represented, or one author's book could be represented. So there's no repeat authors, which was tricky because there's many authors who I love multiple books of theirs. And they had to be books that I became familiar with in my youth. So they're all kind of inspirations to me and why I wanted to become an author in the first place. And it really is a lovely way to ground myself as I go to work in the morning. You know, on a typical school day, I drive my kids to school and then I come back to the farm, and I make myself some coffee and I walk up the book steps and sit down at my computer. And it's a really nice way to remember how important what I'm doing feels, because the books you learn as a child really become a piece of who you are. They help you make sense of the world. They help you feel seen. They help you respect other people around you. So it really has been an important thing for me to kind of feel that as I'm going to work in the morning. It's a nice kind of ritual to go up those stairs.
So how about as a parent though, your book favorites from before, what did you see that with your children and their background? How about some of their favorite books?
Oh gosh, they definitely have a lot of favorite books. Like you'd like me to list some or just talk about?
Just talk about it. Yeah.
Sure.
The difference between, and he was a female 20 years later, you know, that type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so my kids definitely, my oldest in particular, loves reading fantasy and dystopia, which is not as much my ball wax. It's been really interesting to see how his literary tastes differ from mine. And both of them really love graphic novels, which really wasn't a thing a lot when we were kids, right? You had your Archie comics and then you had your novels. There really wasn't a blending, and graphic novels can be incredibly beautiful and well-crafted. And so that's a really neat genre to see them exploring now too. And they are also big fans of audiobooks. As you can imagine, living out on a farm as we do, we spend a lot of time in the car. So audiobooks have become a staple for all four of us. My husband, while in the tractor, will listen to an audiobook. We definitely are big audiobook people.
My son, my youngest, is in college now, but he actually suggested one of the books for our book list this year. It's actually for part of our teacher grant book list. It's again, I'm not a huge dystopian fan, but he's like, Dad, this one's, I think you could make this about agriculture. And I'm like, we loved it, and it's on the list now.
Oh, cool.
Dry by Neil Schusterman, about what if the Colorado River went dry. It is awesome.
Oh, my kids
you'll
love
get to
Neil
the first 30
Schusterman.
pages and you'll read the next 200 just like that. You can't put it down. So
oh, that's exciting.
So again, sometimes things change. Again, wasn't what I was thinking. It's not farm boots, or literally the Colorado River goes dry. So kind of that story. But let's talk a little bit more about another book we mentioned briefly, also from Feeding Minds Press, right this very minute. And talk a little bit about that, because I think there are connections both to boots and to Time for Cranberries with this book.
Yeah, so right this very minute started again, so when I was doing school visits with Time for Cranberries, I became very aware of how disconnected we've become as a society from our food. Now, I did kind of know that, of course, with growing up drinking cranberry juice and not understanding the process, but even in terms of when I would be in a school talking to kids about, how we have the cranberries, they wanted to know, well, what happens after we deliver them? Then what? How does it become the juice? Or I talk to kids about, where does milk come from? And, they'd yell out like Walmart or Quick Trip. And yes, you do get milk in those places, but where does milk come from before the store? And this idea of understanding where your food comes from. And then I happened to be eating dinner with my family. I love to cook. We try to prioritize family dinners as much as we can. It's getting trickier as kids get older and are more involved in activities, but we still make it happen. And just looking at sitting down to a meal and how many different farmers are involved in just one meal. So that really was the inspiration behind Right This Very Minute, which we called A Table to Farm book about food and farming. And the concept being, like, if you're looking at your breakfast table, so, if you're having pancakes, here's your pancake breakfast. So you might have then the story of an orange grower. You might have the story of a wheat farmer, someone in the sugar bush collecting maple sap to make maple syrup. So just this idea of how many different types of agriculture can be involved in just one meal. And then as I said, this was Feeding Minds Press's first book. And then the first book I did with Renee. I do hope we get to do more together, because she's so much fun to work with and I love her art so much. Which is really following different families through a whole day's worth of meals and seeing the different farms that connect on your plate.
And it was released in 2019. I believe it was Farm Bureau's Book of the Year in 2020, right? Or was it?
Yes.
Yeah. So 2020 was the Book of the Year in 2020, and we celebrated that. And then 2 months later, the world shut down. And that whole, to me, right this very minute was key during the pandemic. We use this a lot because we turned virtual too, and we were able to turn to right this very minute to talk about what was going on and how that all worked. So again, if those of you not familiar with it, make sure you check out right this very minute and look at that. I'm sure that during your peer editing with your work with SCBWI, and as you were evaluating this and editing it, there were interesting discussions with those non-farmers as well. I think it's important for these children's books not only to be seen as books for kids, but also every adult can learn from this as well.
Absolutely. And, we don't know what we don't know, right? If no one teaches us things, we don't know it. And even, so my sister is a library media specialist in a middle school. And when Right This Very Minute came out, she shared it with some of her students in middle school, so 6th through 8th graders, of course. And she had one student come up to her afterwards and say, I thought hamburger came from a pig because ham. Now, your instinct might be to laugh at that, but if no one told this kid where, her beef comes from or explained about cattle ranches or anything like that, and she's never seen one, she doesn't know that makes it difficult for her to become a consumer of food later and be an informed consumer for, picking out food and understanding why food costs what it costs and what it takes to grow and make that food. So it really is a book, yes, that is for absolutely everybody. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why my mother always says picture books are rated for everybody. I love reading picture books regardless of the topic, and you do learn a lot, and you get to, they're like little miniature art galleries. The art is always beautiful and tells a story that pairs up with the words. And
well, and again, as you've had 7 books since 2016. That's an awful lot of books. Now, describe a typical day. You talk about taking your coffee and headed upstairs. How many books are you working on at any given time?
That's a great question. A lot. I'm fairly prolific, and I'm very fortunate in that I have been able to write full-time or nearly full-time for the last few years. For a while, I was substitute teaching pretty regularly. And then when COVID happened, of course, they were not using substitute teachers for a while, and I kind of made the leap to being full-time as writing. And I do some teaching about writing as well, which I really enjoy, both virtually and now increasingly more in person. But every day is a little bit different, which I kind of love. I really try to make sure every day I get some time to do the writing piece of it. But there's a lot of other jobs as an author too. There's sharing my work with other people, giving feedback on their work, communicating with my agent about where different projects are, editors letting me know where things are at with various stages of books, communicating with bookstores to try to arrange visits. I have a newsletter that I put out every month, emailing people back who've gotten in touch. So there's a lot of different pieces of that author life. I enjoy them all, but you can forget about the writing piece. It's really like you can lose your writing time really quickly. So I do try to get my writing time in for the beginning of the day if I can. I'm also a night owl, and if I'm awake enough, I do enjoy when the house is quiet and writing in the evening as well. But I do generally have a number of projects going at once. I just turned in my first YA novel to my agent, and I'm waiting for feedback on that. And while she's reading that and making notes on that, I have 2 other novels in different stages, and there's always a handful of picture books that I have kind of coming along too.
Plus, like you just described, I was thinking, the business of being an author. No one talks about that.
No.
Again, I love I'm a subscriber to the newsletter. There's self-promoting. There's and that's it. That's your job is being the author and telling people about that. So not just the behind the scenes stuff, but not just the writing, but all of the other things that go into it. So and finely tuning her craft. I just can't stress that enough that I've known Lisl. I actually dug out the picture since 2013. We were at a workshop together with highlights, and she was there attending it. And it was a great workshop with a couple other fabulous authors. Chris Peterson and Peggy Thomas were there as well. Anna Permel, Lisl, just a number of authors who came to learn more about their craft. And you've heard Lisl talk about, you went to a retreat. So you took time away from your family and away from your business to hone work on your craft. And it's not just sitting down, writing it and waiting for the paycheck to come in. So
No.
I'm sure your husband would like it that way a little bit more, but filling all that in. And when you're gone, honing your craft, somebody's got to pick up the kids, somebody has to make sure supper gets made, that type of thing. So
absolutely. I in the last month, I've been gone for 2 full weeks of that time, which is unusual. And I love that my family makes that work. They get how important that is for me. Last week I was out on the West Coast, still learning, still honing my craft. I was at a very small private workshop about middle grade novels. And it was a tremendous time to be able to really focus and not be worrying about, okay, who's picking up who at what time, and making sure I get all the laundry done, and making sure, dinner's on the table, and having the time to really focus on learning and, getting my excelling my craft and moving things along in a different part of my writing. But then of course I come home and trying to get all the balance back into place. This week has been a lot less writing focused, kind of trying to get, all the balls in the air again after having been gone. But also that part of community, because what I do is a very isolated job in many ways. I don't have coworkers that I see on a regular basis. So meeting with my critique group via Zoom, traveling to a workshop and seeing people in person, and really sharing that understanding of what we're doing, because there is a lot of rejection in writing. Even the leader of the workshop was sharing her rejection stories. There's no point at which you're not, at least I don't know anyone who's at a point where there's no rejection in their writing life, because not every project you write is going to fit the market for whatever reason. And that can be tough. So it's nice to have people who understand that and are on the journey with you too.
Right. And you mentioned the critique group. Not only are you in a critique group and people are critiquing your work, you're helping others as well. I mean, that's part of it. You have to critique their work as well. How much time do you spend doing that, would you say? Just rough.
That's a great question. So I'm in 2 different groups and they both meet monthly. But then oftentimes one of us will reach out to the group too. Hey, does someone have time for a quick read on this? Because I got asked for a revision with a timeline attached. And I really try hard to prioritize those for my critique partners, because they're so great about doing the same for me. And sometimes you just need that second set of eyes. It's amazing how much better I am at finding problems in other people's work than my own work. And everyone says that. So it really does help to have people who can look at your work and vice versa. But it is nice too, now that I'm working with, so my first book, Time for Cranberries, I did not have an agent. So I was doing all of that submission part myself, and the researching of different editors and publishing companies. And it's really lovely to work. I love my agent. She's wonderful. And it's very nice to have her doing that piece of the puzzle too, because she's more glued into what's happening in the industry for who's looking for what.
And now in your critique groups, do you find it easier to give it up to them? Time for Cranberries, I know it was your baby for a long time. It was harder probably, I think, to give it up versus you've done this now. Do you find it easier, or is there still that little bit of apprehension when you hand it off to a critique group?
What a great question. So I definitely know certain projects fit one group or the other better in terms of sensibility, and I try to keep that in mind. It's gotten easier in that everybody has an opinion, and that's what it is. It's an opinion. And there's such a high degree of trust now with the groups I'm in, where, sometimes when you're in a group at the beginning, people have this notion they have to really find things to criticize because they want to impress everybody else with their knowledge of the craft. And once you get into a critique group where people are having success and they know each other well, it's more about, okay, what are you trying to accomplish with this story, and how can we help you make that clear? So it does hit a point where there's definitely more safety and trust in sharing your work. And now sometimes I'll share something and my critique group will find things in it that I never saw and really help me elevate it. And sometimes, we'll share things and we'll kind of have all different opinions on it. But that's nice to know too, that there are options for where you take the story, and ultimately it has to be your story that you know what you're trying to say with it. So
I got a question online that says, have you ever had students give you feedback before it goes to print?
Oh, before it goes to print? No, but one of my favorite things now that we're back doing in-person school visits, which that killed me. I don't mind doing Zoom visits at all, but in person is just so much fun when you get to meet students and they want to tell you their stories and you can do a writing exercise with them and share your work. I have a lot of kids who want to give me ideas for new books, and that's always kind of fun too, because they're always kind of outlandish and delightfully kid-centered, which they should be. And then when what I've also done when I do school visits is these first books from first grade, I read them to the kids and we laugh about how bad they are, because writing is something you need to learn. I didn't just, poof into air as an author. So they really enjoy telling me how I could have made the stories better. And that's a fun way to get them thinking critically about their own writing too. Because,
nothing outlandish like, say, a book about a cat doing Taekwondo, Lisl. I mean, that's all based in reality. So, we heard the story of it. But let's talk about a couple of your other books. I see the last one we haven't mentioned, but On the Go. Can you talk a little On the Go Awesome? You mentioned Jetpack and Taekwondo, but let's give a shout out to On the Go Awesome.
On the Go Awesome is absolutely my love letter to toddlers who love vehicles. Both of my sons loved vehicles, particularly my oldest would carry around little farm vehicles, and someone would say to him, is that your tractor? And he'd say, this is my excavator with an articulated bucket and tracks. Like, that's not a tractor, which, he was a very verbal child, and it was always fun to watch the faces of these adults. But it's just kind of like this joyful book about, it starts with trains, and it follows this pattern where you see the vehicle, you witness the vehicle, you interact with it in a realistic way, and then the main character becomes the conductor or the person in charge of the vehicle in kind of a fantastical way. I love this book so much. I love Robert Neubecker's art. I love his end papers. I want them as wallpaper. Unfortunately, this book came out in November of 2020, and it was about transportation. So it was a really tough book to promote. But I've gotten the experience of reading it now in classrooms now that I'm back at it. And it's a really fun one for preschool and kindergarten, particularly, because it's a very short, full of wordplay and fun vehicle kind of book.
Well, you said you've been gone a couple of weeks. One of those weeks was you were actually with us in Orlando at the National Ag in the Classroom Conference. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience there for people who haven't had the opportunity to attend?
I love Ag in the Classroom. I think the work that they do is just so incredibly important for getting that understanding of agriculture into the classroom and tying it into curriculum. I just had a wonderful experience. It's so full of learning and fun and community, and kind of being in this group of people who all really want to lift up and support agriculture in that way. And talking to teachers about how they're sharing agriculture in the classroom was really fun and interesting. And the workshops were really interesting. I got to have a wonderful conversation with a rose farmer, hearing about her journey with her family's farm. And she's fourth generation of her farm. And we were talking about the issue of farm succession planning and how important and challenging that can be in this day and age, which is largely what the novel I'm working on is about. So that was just really interesting to see how there's that similar thread of challenges and joys in different types of agriculture, whether it's roses or cranberries or beans or corn, that kind of familial family business piece of the puzzle. So it was just a really great experience. I loved presenting. We shared, Julie Recco from Feeding Minds and I shared ways you can use farm boots in the classroom with the educator guide. But then the teachers were telling us all the amazing ways they've used farm boots in their classrooms too. So that was really fun too. it was just a great, you should go if you can go. It's wonderful.
That's it. Thank you. Appreciate that shout out. But with the National Ag in the Classroom Conference, we love featuring authors that the teachers can immediately use. But let's look ahead, because I happen to know who's on the planning committee for the next couple. Let's talk not only your succession planning book for YA, but you have another book coming out that I'm very excited about. Tell us a little bit about Bread.
Yeah, Kevin got a sneak peek of the gorgeous illustrations by David Selman of Ladybug Girl fame, who's illustrating my book, Still There Was Bread, which was absolutely, that book is really a big heart book for me. So if Time for Cranberries is my husband's family story of cranberry growing, Still There Was Bread is my family story of this very specific bread recipe I grew up with my mother making that she learned from her grandmother. And when, of course, COVID hit and we were all baking a lot, and baking bread particularly, I was thinking about how many hard times this bread recipe has gotten my family through. My mother had polio as an infant, and still there was bread. My grandmother spent a summer during the Depression being sent out to her grandparents' farm to live because her family couldn't afford to feed her. She had one dress and no shoes the entire summer. And still there was bread, because bread is made with fairly inexpensive, readily available ingredients. And just kind of that thing of how when you're having a hard time, there's something about the smell and the taste of warm bread that, fresh baked bread, that is really comforting and familial. And it's part of meals from Thanksgiving table to just an ordinary breakfast. I'm so excited for that book to come out in fall of 2024. So
that means we're planning ahead for summer of 2025. All those great wheat. God bless that little red hen, but I am so excited about more wheat books, anything that we can talk about wheat and other activities. So looking forward to that. And again, folks, we got a couple shout outs here about how much everybody loves Lisl Detlefsen. We love Lisl Detlefsen, and thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to more books in the future. Folks, again, if you haven't checked out Farm Boots, you need to. You make sure you get Time for Cranberries, and right this very minute. And that, of course, that official, totally 100% authentic Cat Kwon-Do book. It's right up there. I don't know if you know Alice McGinty's Bathe the Cat. I have two cat books that are my go-tos if I need a cat book: Bathe the Cat and Cat Kwon-Do, because I'm a dog person. So, but you just understand Bathe the Cat. You totally get the picture, But with that, thank you so much to Lisl. We appreciate it so much. You enjoy the rest of your day, and you keep writing. All right. We look forward to what's next. So
it's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Thank you, everyone.
Perfect. Thanks, folks. And with